We have some big wrestling news in today's video. As always, timestamps in the description down below. We're going to kick things off with WWE. Gabe Sapolsky is back in the WWE. If you don't remember Gabe Sapolsky, he worked for Triple H in NXT. He was part of the roster budget cuts. You might remember Gabe Sapolsky historically. He worked for ECW, Evolve, obviously Ring of Honor as well. And it appears that he is back in WWE according to PW Insider. It is being said that Gabe Sapolsky will be working on the creative team. Now, whether or not this is for NXT or the main roster has yet to be revealed. But I find this to be a good thing for WWE. Obviously, Triple H's new regime is starting to bring back some missing pieces, some of the pieces that were part of NXT's overall success. We know there was rumors of Ryan Katz also coming back. Don't know exactly whether the status of that has changed. But of course, you got to wonder who else could be coming back to WWE in this situation, especially when it comes to people that have left WWE for AEW. When their contracts run up, are they potentially going to come back to WWE? Also, you got to keep in mind, how is Triple H going to balance both, right? A lot of people liked NXT Black and Gold, but a lot of people also didn't care for that type of television. And I think one of the big challenges for Triple H, especially going forward, and not just in the short term or the honeymoon phase, but in the long term, it's how can you create a product that is satisfied by all types of fans. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that Triple H is going to have, because what worked for NXT may not necessarily work for the main roster. Now, I have said countless times, you need to have a little bit of a mix, right? You need to have the good wrestling, because at the end of the day, the stories take place in a wrestling ring. But you also need to keep in mind that characters and storylines and continuity within these things, they matter. So I hope Triple H gets it figured out. I think bringing Gabe Sapolsky back is a good thing. It's not a thing that's going to change WWE, but it's going to help WWE, especially when you bring some familiarity to Triple H and his leadership. Now, I find this to be very interesting because there's also some talks of AEW stars requesting out of AEW. We'll talk about that in just a moment. We got to talk about AEW's new signing, Saraya. Now, if you guys didn't know, Paige left WWE. She wasn't cleared to wrestle in WWE, and obviously a lot of people were wondering, would she be able to wrestle in AEW? Now, if you go to AEW's roster page, Saraya is shown there with a record of 0-0, which typically you're not going to have that if you are not an active performer in AEW's roster. But if you watched AEW Grand Slam and you saw Saraya make her debut, then you would know specifically that Saraya did not have anybody get physical with her, which honestly I thought was actually good. I thought the idea of her coming in, kind of just soaking up all of that attention, was the right move. It was a massive pop. However, it's actually been revealed she has not yet been cleared just yet. In fact, Dave Meltzer recently reported on the Wrestling Observer newsletter that Saraya has yet to be cleared, but she would like to be cleared. And pretty much the overall consensus right now is that Saraya should be cleared to return to wrestling. Now, if, let's just say, for example, she is not cleared to wrestle, there are still a lot of great ways to use Saraya in AEW, but I also would scratch my head at this possibility of why tease her in the ring, why potentially tease that Britt Baker feud if Paige, Saraya cannot actually wrestle. And that's one of the things that makes me very intrigued to see what happens here. It did leave me scratching my head for a minute, but if the general belief is that she will be able to get cleared, then I guess it's not really a concern. Now, keep in mind, in 2017, Paige was forced to retire due to spinal stenosis, and that's why she hasn't been able to wrestle. And we have seen people come back from their injuries. We saw Christian, we saw Edge, we saw Daniel Bryan. We've seen all three of these people come back to the WWE or AEW and actually wrestle. So the idea that Paige should be no different is great. And honestly, I just want to see her do great things in AEW regardless of her role. I know a lot of people are picking sides on where she should be, but when you look at Paige and her overall career and just some of the things that she had to endure, personally and professionally, it's good to see that she's making a comeback. And however she makes this comeback, it doesn't really matter. I'm just glad to see that not only does she look good, she looks healthy, but also she could be a really good piece for AEW at a time where they desperately need it, and I think that's a good thing. I want to talk a little bit about MJF because there's been a lot of talk about MJF and just kind of his situation with AEW, right? Because there's been a lot of talk about MJF and whether he's re-signed and all that stuff. Dave Meltzer reported that MJF is making more than $1 million per year. And this is somewhat of a interesting situation for AEW, because when you really consider MJF and his value, I say pay him the money, right? Whether he goes to WWE or AEW, right now, MJF is the talk of wrestling, and he's been the talk of wrestling. In the last several months, I want to say since like May 2022, we saw a dramatic decrease in the overall quality of AEW television at a time where they desperately needed it, right? We saw MJF, we saw the pipe bomb. After that, there was no continuity, there was nothing there, and for a few months, it just seemed like things kind of went like missing. Things kind of seemed like they were not there, like it just wasn't right. So at this point, if MJF did in fact get the raise, that is fantastic. Also, the belief is that MJF really didn't sign an extension. Now, a lot of people are going to think, okay, maybe he actually signed an extension and he's just using this as part of his character and stuff like that, which is always a possibility. He could be working everybody. But one of the great things about MJF, especially in 2022, is the fact that MJF remains in character at all times. And it's very, very rare that you see MJF not in character. So the idea that he's getting the bag, great. The idea that AEW could potentially put the belt on him, fantastic. Now, what is going to happen in the long term? Because you have to keep in mind one thing. There are a lot of talent in AEW who are looking at what WWE is doing, and they are looking at what AEW is doing. And this guy is somebody who basically walked out basically for more money. He wanted more money, and he wanted change. What does this say to other talent who want more money? What does this say to the other talent who look at MJF's situation and say, you know what, like, I'm not going to deal with this shit. I want more money. Typically, you don't just get a pay raise like that in wrestling. You sign a contract, you fulfill your contract, you get another one, or you test free agency. So I think a lot of people are going to be looking at MJF's situation, and maybe it could come back to hurt AEW. I don't necessarily think it will, because of the fact that WWE is very, very good right now. And I think that is one of the reasons why so many people believe that more talent are requesting their releases. In fact, according to Dave Meltzer, Malachi Black was not the only person that WWE reportedly reached out to, right? So there was this belief that Black was not the only person to even ask for his release. There were others, that were really, really happy with AEW, and there's others that weren't necessarily happy with others. So one thing that I find really interesting, if you read this, right, it goes, basically, Dave Meltzer reported that Black was one of the few people in AEW that WWE reached out to about returning after Triple H took over creative. Black was not the only person to ask for his release at the time. Others did not ask for their release and were happy with AEW and contacted management. So there were people in AEW who have requested to leave the company, and there were people who were pretty damn happy in AEW. So I think what you guys need to look at is, especially when you look at the MJF situation, is some people will not be afraid to go to WWE now, where I think under Vince McMahon's leadership, people were like, no, I have to stay in AEW, even if it's bad. We know that WWE is not the desirable place anymore. With Triple H in charge, I think people clearly can tell that there is something special there. So if you're a talent, maybe you might not ask for a raise. You might use WWE as leverage when your contract is up, or when the time is right, you just leave. Guys, this is going to happen, right? Two top companies, both companies could pay out a lot of money. You're not going to be happy. It doesn't matter if you work for WWE or AEW. It doesn't matter how good Triple H is, or how good Tony Khan is, or how bad they are. If you're not happy in your current situation, whether it be personal, booking, creative, financials, whatever, you got to keep in mind that some people at this rate just may not be happy with their circumstance, and they might want out. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below.